Hey everybody, welcome back to Bob Appetit. This week I wanted to learn about the original onion soup. That's right, Tuscan onion soup. What? Carabaccia, or Tuscan onion soup, was the predecessor to the French onion soup. And a huge thanks to Freddie Turner for commenting in my bechamel video that this thing was also carried over to France. So I want to show you what I learned about this dish and the kind of recipe that I pulled together from what I found scouring around the internets. Here we go. For this recipe, we're going to be using 2 pounds of red onions, 1 celery stalk, and 1 carrot, both sliced into half-inch pieces, 4 cups of vegetable stock, 4 ounces of almonds, finely crushed, preferably in a food processor, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, plus a little more for our crostinis in the future, 2 tablespoons of red wine vinegar, 1 cinnamon stick, salt, and black pepper to taste. And for our crostinis, we're going to need 4 thick slices of Toscano bread, or just regular bread that is a little stale, half an ounce of Pecorino Toscano, or Parmesan cheese if you don't have it, and a few sage leaves sliced into ribbons. For the onions, you're going to want a very thin moon sliver slice. To do this, cut off the ends and then cut the onion in half. Remove the skins and now cut against the rings very thinly. To keep the onion from wobbling, once you get about halfway, tilt it on its side. We all know of French onion soup. Thanks to rich, lavish, royal parties, the French get credit for a lot of culinary history. But the fact is that this dish, much like bechamel, came from Tuscany when Caterina de' Medici was married to Henry II. Pour your red wine vinegar into your almond powder and stir to fully incorporate. It'll turn into a paste over time that'll come to act like our thickener for the soup later. Now, heat your olive oil in a Dutch oven over medium-high heat. Toss in your carrots and celery and let cook until softened, about 5 to 7 minutes to get your soffritto going. Now we're going to drop our temperature down to medium and stir in our onions. Make sure to give them a toss so that they're all covered in oil. Now we're going to let these onions sit for 30 to 45 minutes until they soften completely and turn into a rich purple and brown color. You're going to want to make sure to stir them every 5 to 7 minutes to ensure they're not burning on the bottom. Now this is a bit of a dance because you're going to want to lower the temperature if you notice a lot of fond beginning to form on the bottom, or if the onions start sticking. So you may end up going to a medium-low as you do this. And if it takes a little bit longer, that's okay. It's better to not burn them and let them remain sweet during this process. You've probably heard the terms caramelizing and browning used interchangeably. But the fact is that these terms are actually attached to 2 separate processes. One, browning, is attached to the Maillard reaction, which is what happens when proteins break down while sugars are breaking down, and the interchange between them is this delicious combination of flavors. But in the absence of proteins, what we have is something called a pyrolysis non-enzymatic reaction, which is a very fancy way for saying big sugar crystals are breaking down into smaller sugar crystals with heat. And our tongues, which can't taste those big sugar crystals, suddenly can taste the sweet flavors after they caramelize. So that is why when you taste a lot of fruits and vegetables that brown in heat, they tend to taste a lot sweeter than they did in their more raw form. And if you don't know, now you know, Mr. President. Once your onions look like this, rich and a purplish brown color, add in your almond paste and your stick of cinnamon. Stir it until it becomes fragrant, about 3 to 5 minutes. Pour your stock in and stir to incorporate. Bring it up to a boil and then drop the heat down to a medium-low or a low so that it can simmer for 30 minutes. By now you've probably noticed 2 big differences between a Tuscan onion soup and a French onion soup. One being that we're using vegetable broth instead of beef broth, and 2 being that we're using very simple ingredients instead of lavish ones. And the reason is actually the same, which is that this was considered a commoner's soup. So the wealthy may have used lavish ingredients, such as red wine instead of red wine vinegar, or perhaps chicken broth instead of vegetable broth, but it's likely that the original version of this was a vegetable broth. And we have further belief in this given that one of the lovers of this dish, Leonardo da Vinci, was himself a vegetarian. It is common in Tuscany to eat your soups with a piece of slightly stale or crusted bread. Here we have a traditional style pane Toscano, or Tuscan bread. Cut it thick and cover both sides in some olive oil. Add some fresh herbs. I'm using sage plus some Pecorino Toscano, or if you don't have that, then use Parmigiano Reggiano. Pop that into the oven that's preheated to 400 degrees for 15 minutes and boom! Delicious crostini. At the time in Tuscany that people would have been eating this, it would have likely been paired with a Pecorino cheese, or a sheep's cheese. But that would have been Pecorino Toscano, not the Pecorino Romano that is the most common version of Pecorino here in the United States. That Pecorino Toscano is a milder, creamier, easier to melt cheese than Pecorino Romano. This makes it closer to Parmigiano Reggiano than to Pecorino Romano. In contrast with the French onion soup, which puts the bread on top, here we're going to put our bread in the bowl first and ladle our soup around it. It is said that Carabaccia gets its name derived from Karabos, the Greek word for boat. And as you can see, our bread is floating in a sea of onions and almonds. All right, I am excited to give this thing a taste. Let's do it. This is a perfect example of how caramelization works. All of the vegetables that went into this were earthy, root, and yet they came out tasting so sweet with a little hint of acidity with the red wine vinegar and the almonds actually bringing it all together and adding a hint of creaminess. And the crostini brings in the salt with that pecorino and gives it a bit of depth and weight. This is an awesome dish, and it really speaks to the idea that the common people were able to create fantastic meals with such simple ingredients. You can see so much history in such a simple dish, and scarily, so much history can be forgotten just because we got stuck on one version of the soup. All I know is I am so excited to continue going through the history and the science of all of these kinds of beautiful dishes. If you have any other suggestions for things I should research, leave them down in the comments. And remember, study at the dinner table. We'll catch you next time.